I'm going to hand over to Leonie, who's going to talk in a little bit more detail about the things adults do that put teenagers off reading.
As Bronwyn mentioned, we did find quite a few teens who were identifying as readers and were quite happy to seek recommendations from their parents or a school librarian, a teacher librarian, especially if there's a relationship going on and a history of their picks being good. But this wasn't true of all of our kids who spoke to us in the focus groups. In fact, we had an expression of quite a lot of pushback expressed on choices made on behalf of teens by adults. So for some of these, it's just not wanting their parents or their teachers' tastes to be pushed on them or expected of them in some way. In others, it's just a lack of confidence that the adults in their lives know them well enough to make a good choice. In our survey, we had a question about library recommendations, and it said something along the lines of, why don't you seek recommendations from your school library? There were quite a lot of other comments that said, I don't think my librarian would know what I like, words to those effect. And that's a little bit about this idea of, well, I'm a universe to myself for some people, yeah. And some also reported feeling annoyed when a parent noticed they were reading and made a comment about it, like, oh, you're reading a book, that's good. And as if this was the kind of rare or a choice that you need to approve. So it's not only the choice to read, but there's a little bit of pushback against implying what children or young people ought to read that came up in these discussions. Many of the schools that we talked to, school librarians and teachers, said, well, we're an academic school, we focus on performance, there's an emphasis on reading for study, and that's what our parents expect. So there's a sense in which reading for pleasure, especially if it's not Jane Austen, is implied it's a lesser value, and it's not what you should be doing to get on. But there's also judging by implication, not up front. That is to say, when young people are meant to felt that their recreational choices are seen as second rate, or they should move up to something more worthy. Things like phrases like trashy novels or graphic novels not being seen as proper reading. And we have a very sad parent here who had to put the classics away because their teen in their life was not interested in reading them. And beyond this, there's sort of the question of privacy coming up in some of the parent interviews and also in the teen interviews to a lesser extent, that a real resistance to having monitoring or surveilling of what's being read. And it's not always because they think it's naughty, but it's mine. One parent in the PhD study mentioned of having to really just shut down on her desire to gush about the books that are being read because her daughter didn't think it was terribly cool. So, that's my own thing, Mum, I don't want you to be talking about that. So, what do we do instead? Very hard. What's coming out in a lot of the interviews with many of our intermediaries is create the condition to support teen reading. So make space in your life and in the life of your team for reading. I mean, we have our lovely little book nook, but some parents have talked about making a little corner of the living room that's got soft lighting or, space which is a reading space. And so it's making reading material available, which they might have curated without telling the teens what to read. Modelling reading and talking about books. And I think that's probably a bit of a fine line, isn't it, Bronwyn? Because you don't want to, you have to read the room, in a sense, whether the teen wants you to talk about their books, but positive comments about what you're enjoying, that you're enjoying what you're reading, is seen to be a good piece of advice. And some parents talked about making reading part of their teen's social life, like on the weekends they'd go for a walk to the bookshop. and, might have a coffee and look around and browse the books. So, as we say, we have a couple of PhD projects associated with the study, and Anne-Marie May, who couldn't be here tonight, has done quite a bit of work in the Western Melbourne area with, if you like, a located geography of readers, library schools, public libraries, parents and teen readers. And she spoke to a number of parents of teens who were avid readers, finding that these parents did take a kind of intermediary role in their own right. So going to bookstores, going to public libraries and trying to access a selection that might be on offer for the reader to choose from. They're liking to hear advice about what's good from booksellers and so on, but not finding public libraries quite as helpful. And it's a bit of a double bind, really, because public libraries don't get a lot of teenagers through their doors, so some managers are a little bit loath to have a really good collection, and they may be foregrounding other things for the libraries to be used on. Therefore, if there's not a good collection, the parents won't necessarily come and look for books there. But parents will use these resources to select quite a few books to take home with them. Teens, also we spoke to teens and as well. They also talked about search strategies, and some of them obviously quite happy to rely on their mum to get things from the public library. The parents having a bit more mobility, really, and free time to go. But also another interesting set of dialogues around how you search up and what you choose that you're really going to look at. Maybe I'll use the school library as a resource, but get it from somewhere else.
That makes no sense, though. If they've seen the book in the school library, why wouldn't they pick the book up and borrow it?
Well,
So they then go home
well, you may ask. But in the student focus groups that Anne-Marie did, there was a lot of fear about school library policies, about not that people do have fines much anymore, but just worried that they might go away on holiday and not bring the book back. And there seemed to be quite a bit of anxiety about that, which doesn't seem to be much rhyme or reason for it, because, there aren't fines anymore, but just a bit of internalised worry about having a...
library to find students ever. Public libraries do, but school libraries...
No.
I know.
That's right.
Every
But
time I move locations, I
that's right, but that's not what the teens are, they've still got anxiety about it for some reason. But yes, why wouldn't I borrow it? Or maybe it's just because I don't have to remember. Yeah.
If I could just make a comment there on that, I think that also might be into that category of teenager sees a book, oh, maybe I'm interested in that, but I want to do my own research and decision making before I decide I'm going to commit my time to reading a book. I do see an element of that in terms of someone's giving me a recommendation, I'll write it down, I'll go and do my own research before I do commit. That may be a play in this instance.
So our next speaker